Brian is going to be on to preach this morning. So would you join me in welcoming Brian?
As a professor, I enjoy requiring assignments that students don't like. Now, I don't mean like long research academic papers, primarily because I don't want to grade them and read them, but I mean some assignments that I think are good for them, possibly transformative for them personally, but that they would not choose. So one of them that I assign fairly regularly involves them receiving feedback about themselves. They reach out to maybe their life partner, lifelong friend, co-worker, a mentor, sibling, people in their life, and they ask 3 questions. What words would you use to describe me? What do you appreciate about me? And what do you wish was different about me? Now, I'm not a total hypocrite. I practice this myself semi-regularly. I've reached out to some people in this room who've given me feedback in the past. So I want to read a quote of feedback I received to you today. I'll hold back the negative ones. I'll keep them just for me. I thought you would enjoy and feel encouraged at the beginning of a Sunday morning to hear a nice thing that someone said about me to me. So I thought I'd read that to you. This person said, "You are open to God's loving and sometimes frightening presence, and you invite others to join you. You are one of the few who I have known who is drawn to this experience." Now, I don't know if you caught those words, but it didn't really seem like positive traits about me. I did not hear that at all. I did not hear you're encouraging or talented or handsome, anything like that. It was that I am open to a loving and sometimes frightening experience with God. Doesn't sound like a compliment, but this person is right. And that I don't know about you, maybe it's not the case for you because you're a better person than I am, but I feel like if I open myself genuinely to my Creator, it is frightening. It's not always encouraging or certainly not affirming. Well, we are moving on with a teaching series that we're calling Party Time, and it's not nearly as enjoyable as the title of the series. Someone here thought, you know what we should do? We're already talking about religion a lot. Let's also talk about politics and put them both together. So that is what we are doing. But my friend again was right. I do find God's presence to be frightening. And the portion of the scripture we're going to look at today, I find troubling, not easy, possibly frightening. So what we're going to do this morning, I have kind of 5 concepts, if you will. They're not exhaustive. You might have other ones. But where I'm going to try to mash up some of the words of Jesus with our current political moment. After that, we'll have a little bit of time to interact together. If you have a comment or a question, I see you over there. We can interact together. It'll be great. And then we'll spend a little bit of time in prayer. So hopefully that sounds all right for you. I'm going to read from the Gospel of Matthew, first book in the New Testament. It's kind of a biography of the life of Jesus. Matthew 25, where it is kind of a key teaching of Jesus himself. He is speaking. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and this is kind of older Jewish language for the promised one of God. Jesus is saying, when I come back in glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. So like I said, I have kind of 5 concepts that stick out to me, not exhaustive. You might have other ones. Number 1, politics involves human beings trying to figure out, how to make this world work effectively. It seems that nobody fully understands the best way forward. So it's interesting to me in this teaching of Jesus, at the end of everything, both the righteous and the unrighteous, the just and the unjust, say, "Lord, when did we see you?" And there's almost this sense in this teaching that both the good and the wicked don't fully understand what's happening. Now, I don't know about you, but I find this a little troubling. It's like Jesus is implying that at least in this world, there isn't really any adults anywhere that are in charge. None of us exactly know. Number 2, second concept. Eventually, there is a real judgment on human beings. Some human lives are ultimate failures. Again, verse 41. "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Ouch. Verse 46. "Then they will go away to eternal punishment." I find this frightening. It is. But if you've explored Jesus at all in his teaching in his public life, this is not an uncommon vision that he offers. That there are some human beings whose lives are an utter failure, and it echoes after this one. Now, who would enjoy that? The theologian Miroslav Volf teaches at Yale, is one who says there are benefits to keeping this in mind. He actually says we need to remember there is a final cosmic judgment in order actually to make our society run peaceably. Listen to what he says. The practice of nonviolence, or living at peace with each other, requires a belief in divine vengeance. My thesis will be unpopular, but imagine speaking to people, as I have, whose cities and villages have been first plundered, then burned and leveled to the ground, whose daughters and sisters have been raped, whose fathers and brothers have had their throats slit. Your point to them, we should not retaliate. Why not? They would ask. I say this, the only means of prohibiting violence by us is to insist that violence is only legitimate when it comes from God. Violence thrives today, secretly nourished by the belief that God refuses to take the sword. It takes the quiet of a suburb for the birth of this thesis that human violence is a result of a God who refuses to judge. In a scorched land soaked in the blood of the innocent, that idea will invariably die like other pleasant captivities of the liberal mind. If God were not angry at injustice and deception and did not make a final end of violence, that God would not be worthy of our worship. Ouch. But he's saying if God finally judges, then you and I don't have to play that role with each other. We leave that to our Creator. Number 3, final judgment in this passage is not determined by our political affiliations, our political positions, or even our official beliefs, but by how we personally relate to difficult people who cannot help us. That's what this teaching of Jesus clearly implies. Now, at first reading of the story, you're like, well, there's a clear political philosophy here. I don't need to name that. You can figure that out. Verses 40 and 45, whatever you did or did not do to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did or did not do for me. But I don't know if you've noticed this. There's something unusual historically. It's happened before, but it's been a while for us in our current culture. We are radically fragmented into niche groups, which means whatever group you identify, I'll let you pick what that is, Christians, atheists, people of color, white people, conservatives, progressives, traditional family, LGBT, whatever group you identify with, we probably have a different list of who are the least of these that people aren't helping. And most any group now in America feels like their group is being unfairly treated by all of the other groups. So who is the most hurting people? We disagree. This summer, I took a group of students to Kansas City. And when I do that, we go to a whole bunch of different cultural sites, different churches, very progressive to very conservative, the ones with giant steeples to Pentecostal and everything in between. One of the churches we went to was led by a Latino pastor, and he shared about how this congregation has prided itself on being the most inclusive church in Kansas City since the 1970s. But he told us this story. He said there's an older gentleman that started coming on Sundays, and it was clear that he was lonely, that he was hurting. And so the congregation does what it does. It welcomed him in. He started to get involved. He started to make connections. He started to volunteer. And one of our members came to me and said, "Pastor, I'm really concerned." He said, "What's that?" He's like, "That new guy, yeah." He's like, "He's full on MAGA. We're an inclusive church." And the pastor looked at him and said, "If we're a church where everyone feels welcomed and loved, then that means everyone, including supporters of a certain presidential candidate." This pastor was right. But I also find it a little frightening. Because as I read Jesus, he seems to be implying that the final evaluation of my soul will be how I relate to people that not only I tend to ignore, but maybe I struggle with. That's kind of the implication of this text. Number 4, if there is a group or a people that we ignore, we are cutting ourselves off from some aspect of God. This is from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to John Adams in 1813. He was talking about Jefferson put together the Jefferson Bible. He literally sat down with a pair of scissors, cut out a bunch of stuff that he doesn't think was legit, paste the one together he likes. Jefferson says to Adams, in extracting the pure principles which he taught, Jesus, there will be found remaining the most sublime and benevolent code of morals which has ever been offered to man. I have performed this operation by cutting verse by verse out of the printed book and arranging the matter which is evidently his and which is as easily distinguishable as diamonds in a dunghill. So you see what Jefferson's saying. I cut out parts and I'm like, yeah, this is probably what God's up to. And then there's a bunch of other stuff in the Bible that it's kind of like dung, excrement. It's not really true. You don't need to pay attention to that. And it's interesting to me that this was performed by a very brilliant but deeply flawed man, who some of the organization of our culture that works best, he helped to design. He also owned 600 enslaved people. And we know he fathered children with at least one enslaved girl. But you see this pattern, right? I like these things about divine revelation, not those. These people kind of matter, not those people. If it's true that all human beings are made in the image of God, that God created all people, he sustains all people, therefore he holds all people together, in some mysterious way God is within all people, then if any group or person we ignore or dismiss, we are doing that to our Creator himself. I mean, Jesus says that right out, verse 45. Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. How I relate to God parallels how I relate to the people that are the least important to me. I don't know if you noticed this summer, but there was an interesting headline I saw in the news. A prominent black pastor says white poverty doesn't get enough attention. The Reverend Dr. William Barber II, he's known as the national leader in the NAACP, talking about his book entitled White Poverty. He said, when you stand up for justice, you really care about all people. 135 to 140 million are poor or low-wage people in this country. 66 million are white, which is 40 million more than black people in raw numbers. And I just found this utterly fascinating and brilliant and Jesus-like. That you have a person who's known as an activist for the African American community who says, if I'm going to be consistent with what Jesus is calling me to, I have to care more about poor white people also. And then number 5, to align with Jesus's political vision inwardly, it may feel like we are choosing against our intuitions so that we can be good to people that we do not have to be good towards. I don't know if you noticed this, but the highest grossing film in the United States and globally so far in 2024 is Inside Out 2. What does that say to you? We are an internal, psychologically oriented, inner feelings type people. This is even what we do to entertain our children, is we explore where we are on the inside. Now, if this is true, and it is, what I think it feels like to take this teaching of Jesus seriously is that inwardly I feel like I don't like that person, or those type of people I have a real problem with, and I feel uncomfortable, but I'm going to choose against this to be kind or positive or do something helpful for them. That's what I think all of this feels like on the inside. My mom is not a college graduate, but she spent her career working for a group of heart surgeons. She was a single mom, taking care of me, my sister, and then eventually my sister's baby. But she had some stories about the surgeons. And I remember hearing a few of them where she would say, Dr. So-and-so cussed everyone out in the hallway today. Or Dr. So-and-so called people names. Or after that, Dr. So-and-so slammed his door. And I remember saying to my mother, why? And she would say, because they can. There are not very many people who are qualified to be heart surgeons. And then she would say to me, Brian, a test of character is how you treat people that you don't have to treat well. I think Jesus agrees with Mom. Okay, I said we'll have some time to interact together. If you have a question, a comment, a kind disagreement, I think Andrew has a microphone. Please put your hand up and let's talk for a few.
Who's got one? Weirdly walk down the aisle.
My name's David. I had no idea that you were going to bring this, right? We had a conversation earlier about politics and agreeing to disagree.
We did? I thought we were talking about the 49ers.
Yes, but then afterwards,
Okay, all right.
yes, agreeing to disagree, right?
Okay.
I'm sure a lot of people around here like, Niners? Yes. I think I'm glad that I'm here today. First of all, I love when you are up there. I get a lot out of it, right?
Thank you.
And it challenges me. And because of where I'm at now, right? Being able to say, I love all people. I struggle with a certain people, right? Mm-hmm. And in this struggle, when they are continuously pointing at me, how do I continue to love, right? How do I continue to take on this to the least of these, right? Because they are the least for me, right? I'd rather just walk away and say, you know, I'm gonna agree to disagree by walking away from you, because if I don't, right, then I'm gonna say some things also, right? Very outspoken. So
yeah, thank you. Just a couple responses. One, this is incredibly hard. I mean, it is frightening. It is challenging. I've read this text for years. I always find it scary because I know who I am. So this is challenging, but that's kind of the point. I mean, it's part of what the Spirit is doing is pushing us to be higher and larger people than who we naturally are. So I think this is hard for all of us. Secondly, how do we do it? I don't know. But what I want to say is it is a choice that I think feels like going against what we want. I don't know that many of us, maybe there's some of you saints in the room, but I don't think many of us will ever be at a point where like, yeah, there's people I totally disagree with that I think are a problem, but I just am filled with love for them. I don't think that's how most of us will ever feel. But we can grit our teeth. We can choose to say, all right, this would be the best way for me to relate to these individuals, or something positive I can do towards them, not because I think they deserve it, but because that's who our God is. And this is why we do this. I mean, do you ever stop and think how weird this is? I mean, it's your day off. You should be home, sleeping in. This is California. Football's already on. On the East Coast, it's not on till 1 o'clock. It's already on. But why do we do this? Because following Jesus is hard. It goes against our grain, and we need context that just kind of reframe us again a little bit. But thank you for naming what's hard for all of us. Very much so.
Thanks for the challenging word. I think essentially what I hear you echoing are the words of to follow the journey of our faith is essentially to die to self.
Yeah.
And I think, which begs the question, how do I continue this ongoing dying of self without almost literally dying and losing oneself? So what are some of the practices or rhythms that Brian implements to sustain oneself in this journey of continuing to die to self?
Well, again, it's a regular battle. And dying to self, this echoes last time I think I was here talking. Dying to self doesn't mean I make myself last always and just do whatever you want. Dying to self means I realize there's a big natural part of me that only thinks of me, and I want to die to that so I can open myself up to God's goodness and prayerfully be a channel of that to other people. How do we do that? It's all the stuff we know. It's all the regular spiritual practices. It's being here consistently on a Sunday. It's fasting. It's silent or contemplative prayer. It's confession. And if you're a Protestant, being like, I don't think we do confession. We do. That is, you go to a close friend or maybe a counselor and you share a whole bunch of stuff that you're struggling with. Like all of these practices, but we have to choose them. Because our society, people make a lot of money off of playing to the worst of our natural selves. And so the older I get, I feel like we have to be very vigilant in choosing spiritual practices, and even at times, if I don't sound like the weird old guy, of avoiding certain things so that we are more open to the Spirit instead of just being used by corporate interest to just live naturally, if that makes sense.
We got time for one more.
Thanks, buddy. Oh, I can't hold it? Fine. Keep your microphone.
That's great.
My name's Scott. The one thing that has always touched me about Matthew 25 is the personal nature of it. When you do this to the least of these. I'm a retired pastor. Can I tell you how many times, I can't tell you how many times in 38 years, I was told, I wasn't asked, I was told it's my job to visit the sick. It's not what Jesus said. He didn't say when your pastor does these things, or when your government does these things, or when your church does these things. It's when you did these things. 38 years I tried to drive that home. I have no idea whether it was ever listened to. But that's what strikes me in Matthew 25. What did you do for the least of these? And that's a measurement tool. What am I doing? What have I done? What will I do to the least of these?
Thank you.
Questions of a pastor. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great final word. False spirituality takes all sorts of forms, but one of the forms it takes is I'm going to use God stuff to get everyone else to change. Genuine spirituality is always about how does God want to transform who I am from the inside out. Genuine spirituality is always doing that. So thank you for sharing.